just as a kind of a overall tone setting for this particular session, our world is losing 5 million hectares of forest to deforestation every year. This is from the World Data, some website, to palm oil, to soya, etc. But the restoration community is blocked from restoring these forests that have been lost. So this actually means that the world has gained 5 million hectares of agricultural land every year, which is cattle and wheat and rice and soya and so on. So that's the kind of the equation every year. Likewise, our world or the planet is losing glaciers, wetlands, grasslands, coral reefs, it all. But I'm not going to quote the figures here, but whatever it loses and whatever capacity that this biosphere has for replenishing itself is hampered by manifold increases in by another kind of habitat. So this diminishing is accompanied by another kind of habitat increase. And for the moment, let us just call it the city space and its attendant supply chains, which, are basically eating up the whole world. So in this scenario, what is the living world doing? And in specific, what are the plants doing, native and exotic, the ones who are on the brink, retreating, and the ones who are expanding? What exactly, to the best of our science and our understanding and our fellowship, because I think we're all in here because we feel this profound fellowship with other living beings. What is at large? How can we bring our collective understanding to this? What is driving various species this way or that way? When 75% of mammals have been exterminated by modern human cultures literally in the blink of an eye, and at the same time, there is an explosion of livestock, crop plants, and human numbers and human technologies, what is the interplay of the several invasions that appear to be well underway? So this is the broad kind of thematic framework for the series in this webinar series. And the question that I personally have is, are we in risk of blaming the messenger? So, I'm part of one of the longest weeding operations in the country, in the service of native species. We actually have been at it for 50 years. And the question really, as practitioners, what is the practical reality of eradicating a species? But, and I'm going to end with this, beneath and beyond all this is simply, for me personally, an abiding love for plants and a fascination with ecology, which is basically relationships at its most primary level, at first principles level. What are plants? What do they do? What is this extraordinary complexity, the tip of which is only what we see? And how can I not reduce them with my own lens, my lens of good and bad and nice and not nice and beautiful and horrible and necessary and unnecessary? So at least for me, it's pretty subjective. Armed as I am with a lot of current knowledge, it still is subjective. And the thing is, to not fall susceptible to manufactured meaning, which means that before we have a bigger problem, which is what I started with, which is simply habitat loss, habitat destruction, outright destruction, which is direct, it's irreversible, and it's also indirect, which is the poisoning of air and water and climate and soil. So, so can we look directly at plants for a bit? And I have, I think, 4 amazing speakers who are going to help us look at plants moving this way and moving that way. So right now we're going into Dr. Rohan Shetty's session. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Rohan now and talking intensively with him on a number of issues. He's an associate professor and postdoctoral research scientist at the University of Ústí nad Labem, Czech Republic. And he's also the co-founder of the Green Concept, a firm that works in applied ecology, carbon assessments, and ecosystem restoration. Rohan, what do you have to share with us?
Thank you so much, Suprabha. So yeah, as you rightly said, restoration, invasion, invasive, it's inseparable. Let me walk you through our story. I know the story is from Europe, but the reason that I choose this story is one is I'm very closely linked to it, and it's something that we've been intensively working on, and it has a layer of everything. When I say everything, starting from human intervention to natural advent to debating what is actually invasion to uh, policy achievements and policy failures, both. That's the reason I have particularly chosen this example because, yeah, I'm A, closely associated with it, and B, it's got a lot of learnings from different layers. So let me straight away get on with it. Just let me know once you can see my screen. So yeah, visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Yeah. So let me get straight to it. So invasives, invasion, and restoration. So today, what I'll be sharing is basically a story of Norway spruce, how it has ecologically migrated in a natural ecological order, at what point it started becoming an invader in our sense of understanding of invasion, which is fairly debatable. As I said, restoration and the concepts of invasion are more open to uh, discussion. And out of discussion, we are learning. So, over the last 40 years that we have been studying this, we are still learning. So, I want to leave you all today with more questions than answers, because that is where I see I'm successful, because your questions and your discussion is something that I would like to take away. And yes, and at what point, how ecosystems have shifted and how these shifts have actually caused massive changes to large landscapes. And why I am not saying vegetation over here, because today we are going to see at a multiple level of invasion, wherein we are talking about a few insects, and we are also talking about vegetation at large. That's the reason, yeah, there's a lot of layers to our story. So let's begin. So how are the forests in Central Europe? So they're large landscapes, predominantly dominated by Norway spruce, that's Pizia abies, with a mix of oak, beech, maple, pseudo maple, larch, Tilia cordata, and a few temperate species. The critical part over here is really the low soil pH, which has come to be because of various reasons. I'll get to the reasons. Part of them are ecological, and part of them are completely man-made, and part of them have resulted in the synergy of both. I say that we have got a multi-layered learning lesson over here. So we've got massively cold and dry conditions with rising temperatures. We all know climate change. I'm not going to talk a lot about climate change because we are all aware about it. Now we are having massive forest diebacks and really very, very low vegetation diversity. So let me quickly get this into the context of what it means for our restoration project. So let me first tell you a little bit about the ecological past of the Norway spruce, because there's always a lot of discussion about what is a natural advent or a natural migration of a species. When does it naturalize? What is invasive? See, this is the gray zone that I really want to open the discussion with. And that's the reason I share this ecological story, because somewhere rooted in the ecology, we understand the behavior of an ecosystem and how we as humans have tweaked it in a certain context. So I want to bring in these gray zones for discussion. So that's the reason I see that the ecological past is kind of critical to understand the story of our PCA. So yeah, let me just give you the context of our restoration. So it's not um, uh, it's quite modest in size. It's about 1,700 hectares. That's about 4,200 acres of land between Germany and the Czech Republic, where largely most of it lies on the side of the Czech Republic, and so close to 1,100 acres is on 1,100 hectares is on the side of the Czech Republic. Whereas 600 hectares is on the German side, and it's basically connected with the Elbe River that flows through. And yeah, it's a very beautiful, though non-natural landscape. And yes, let's get into the nitty-gritty details of the restoration. So, what is happening? Where is the ecosystem at, and what do we want to achieve? So, what we have is a disastrously low level of soil pH, sometimes close to 3 or 4, where the soils are really, really, really acidic. Norway spruce is dominant. Uh, it's about 80% of vegetation cover. I'll get to why it is so in a bit. When we look at the ecological story, there's just legion of monocultures which were devised by foresters just after the World War and pre-industrialization. So that has resulted in a turmoilous change in the soil chemistry, also now in the water chemistry. And it looks like a beautiful, single structured, manicured, nice looking European forest, which is absolutely non natural in nature. Where do we want to go with this, really? So, what we want is to achieve a massive change in the soil conditions, because I will talk a little bit more about the soil conditions and nitrate values. And remember that soil is critical to change any ecosystem. When soil changes, whatever on top of the soil is also changes. So whenever you are thinking of any restoration, it cannot be done without soil. I'm pretty certain everybody here knows it, but I just want to reiterate it because it's just very critically important. Second is what we want to achieve is basically a mixed vegetation. Uh, Initially, before spruce forests took over, this used to be a mix of beech and oak forest, which was a wet forest and which was fairly resilient to warming. So, what we want to achieve is largely a multi layered structure, which we are achieving in some places and we are badly failing in some. I'll also get to those points. And we want to increase a mixture of mosaic of ecosystems where we have more shrub thickets, more juniper thickets, wherein there are just more layers to our forests. So, yeah. Now let's get to what is happening ecologically and how the anthropos has actually manipulated these ecosystems. So let's quickly get into the ecological history of our invader, the Norway spruce. So, scene one of the movie. Close to 6,500 years ago, most of these lands were a mix of Telia, um, a little bit of pines, a little bit of oaks, largely beech, fraxinus, ash, and Douglas fir forests, which were slowly, very, very gradually. Now, keep this slowly and gradually somewhere at the back of your head because that is what is important. Norway spruce started making its way into these zones, but the advent was very, very slow. So, nonetheless, as slow as it was, the local forests were not able to keep up with the changes in the soil acidification mechanism that was triggered by the Norway spruce as it started making its way more northwards. Now, I must say that this has been also supported to a large extent by heat waves in between, which kind of caused Norway spruce to have a better edge over the local temperate communities. It mixed up well, but it was still not dominant. So this was a slow advent, something that was a natural, or we can assume it was a fairly natural ecological process. Now comes the scene two, where the same Norway spruce, because of its dry nature of the wood and better timber value, got a big boost by humans during the world wars and then in the industrialization, because everybody wanted timber. Um, a, a big chunk of this German-Czech border zone is also a hub for manufacturing cars. It is a hub for mining. It's a very industrially active hub even as of now. So yes, that's where the human flavor kind of started bolstering Norway spruce in its own ways. Now comes the part wherein Norway spruce actually started becoming more and more successful as it started spreading more and more north with human support. So, over the last, say, close to 70 to 80 years, Norway spruce has been very well established because it's got fast growth, it's very timber efficient, it grows in highly acidic soils, but it also kind of modifies the nature of the soils. And this was kind of supported with fast removals of oaks, beech, maple, Douglas fir, and Tilia cordata. Now comes the scene three. Uh, Due to this modification and climate change, also due to input of massive nutrition and pollution put together during the 1970s, 80s, and the 90s, where industrialization was at a boom in Europe, this kind of led to a lot of acidification of the soils and also a lot of acid rains. Now, this caused a lot of forest dieback. I actually, my group published a paper last year which looked at how vegetation can be used as a good proxy of knowing how chemical changes have happened. And just yesterday, we published a paper about how we can also use vegetation to track mercury changes in the forest. So more about that later. But the crux of this story was that soil acidification led to better establishment of Norway spruce and absolute removal of all the other species. What did this do? 2022, we got massive forest fires, which these are basically photos that you see are from my own sites. And the bark beetle attack started beginning. Bark beetles have been very successful against Norway spruce. Now we have a new invader invading our old invader, essentially taking off all the green cover that was there. Now, close to 40% or more than 40% of Czech forests are in jeopardy because the bark beetle is very successful against Norway spruce. So, 2022, these are just some pictures from our own forest plots wherein we are having massive forest fires, which led to close to at least 3 to 400 acres of our forest plots have been completely destroyed. So this is from my own forest plot. And now fire has played a new level of change in our ecosystems. Now, with all of this, where is our restoration going? So the first thing for us was to kind of treat the soil and then start treating the vegetation that has to go with it. So late 1990s and the year 2000, the Czech and the German government started liming the soils and changing at least the acidity. It is still very fragmented and not yet completely successful. But wherever liming actually reached and it became successful, we are now having a slow regeneration of beech and oak forests. Um, I will say that even there are enough papers from the 50s and the 60s wherein a lot of ecologists already knew what was happening. But policy decisions, industrial foresters who thought that they are ecologists and they were not, led to monocultures. And this is completely a human induced problem and a human known failure where a lot of inaction has caused a lot of problems. So as much as I can say that we have also succeeded in few parts, we have also grandly failed because of industrial forestry. Yeah, so that is something that we can discuss more upon as we go ahead. But now what we are doing is that we are reintroducing most of the old species. It's a very slow process. We are correcting the soils as we go. In some cases, we have won. In some cases, we have not. But now, as we move ahead in time, what we've kind of learned that there are some species which will inhibit a certain ecosystem very quickly. It's good to use them for very harsh environments, and as time passes, you need to kind of start um, reinventing your ecosystem by changing them to native species and whatever was in your relatively referenced ecosystem. And finally, just to summarize with our uh, conclusions, is that whenever you're talking restoration, always understand that invasives are not a problem, they are a symptom. Wherever there is invasion, we must see where was the human touch, if I have to put it very consolidatedly. And yeah, that's really the key part. And I would like to just end up with one last sentence saying that generally in restoration, what we've seen is that there are no rewards and there are no punishments, there are only consequences, and they usually come in a lag effect. So with that, I would like to stop for now. And I know it was very fast, but I would like to open this to questions, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you so much.
Rohan, thank you so much. This is a reiteration of such fundamental principles, of when conditions change, plants change, and then when plants change, conditions change again. So I would call that a first principle thing that I'm deriving from your talk. And I will look forward to more comments from people that, in the second half of this session. Mahesh, hi, are you ready?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need
Good.
control of the screen though.
Yeah, I really enjoyed meeting you last year in Ooty and sharing another session on a similar topic. And perhaps we have a kind of a range of things that we've been looking at in this highland biome, in the upper Nilgiris and so on. So I look forward to hearing some more. And for those who don't know Mahesh Sankaran, Dr. Mahesh Sankaran, he's an ecologist interested in understanding the factors that regulate the structure, distribution, and functioning of tropical savanna and grassland ecosystems. And again, to me, that is basically how do plants go this way and how do they go that way, depending on what happens. Mahesh, over to you.
Right. So first off, I'd like to thank the organizers for asking me to be a part of this this panel. It's really great to be here. And what I thought I'd do today is talk about some of the work that we've been doing over the last few years, looking at the causes and the consequences of woody plant invasions in montane forest grassland or shola grassland mosaics of the Western Ghats. And sort of one of the things I'd like to bring home here is how misperceptions about what this biome actually is and what structures this biome has led to historic mismanagement of these ecosystems that has had far-reaching consequences that we're feeling even today after, almost 100, 150 years. But what I'd like to do, since I'm going to be drawing on the work of a lot of students and collaborators, I'd like to thank them right at the start. So I'm going to be talking a lot of the work of Dr. Atul Joshi when he was part of our lab, and also Yadagiri, Hari, Siddharth, Chenga, Manaswi, and Rasika. And also long-term collaborators, Dr. Jayashree Ratnam from NCBS, Dr. Jagdish Krishnaswamy, who is currently at IIHS, and Srinivas Vaidyanathan and Ravi Bhalla from Ferrell, right? So, like I said, I'm going to be talking about our work in forest grassland mosaics, or shola grassland mosaics as they're called. And shola grassland mosaics are very curious and enigmatic biome for several reasons, the least, not least among which is they tend to fly in the face of, one of the most commonly accepted tenets in ecology, which is that of the climax community, or one climate, one biome hypothesis, right? So on the other hand, we have a system here where on the same climate, we have two different vegetation types. We have both grasslands and forests coexisting right next to one another without one displacing the other, right? And these systems, even though they may be fairly restricted, they're not restricted where they occur. They just don't occur in the Western Ghats. They're actually fairly widely distributed across the globe. We find them, places like Malawi, in the Hotton Plains in Sri Lanka, Bolivia, Brazil, Madagascar, Swaziland, South Africa. So they're fairly widespread, but they do tend to be fairly restricted where they occur. And now if you look at it through the lens of this whole climax community lens, which is how many of the colonial foresters and the early ecologists actually viewed these ecosystems. The first obvious potential thought that comes to mind is, well, these were all forested ecosystems at one point in the past. And at some point, humans have come in and they've cleared these forests, which has given rise to the grasslands. And so this is an anthropogenically derived biome, right? But it turns out that this is not actually the case in most of these biomes. So this is work from Dr. Sukumar's group from IISc, where they looked at sediment cores and tried to recreate the vegetation in the past. And you can do this based on isotope ratios, pollen, and so on. I'm not going to get into the details of it. But essentially what they've shown, at least for the Nilgiris, is both grasses and woody vegetation forests have persisted for at least 40,000 years and way before human presence in these habitats. And the same results have been shown from several other ecosystems, like in Brazil and elsewhere, that many of these mosaics are in fact ancient, they predate human presence, and so they're most likely not anthropogenic in origin. Now, we've been working on trying to understand what actually structures these biomes, what maintains this, and how they come about. But I'm not going to be talking about that today. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on how, viewing these ecosystems through the lens of this climax community concept has actually led to, significant changes in their structure today just because of misperceptions in what these biomes should be, right? And so most of our work has been done in the upper Nilgiris. And what I thought I'd do is start off by providing some kind of a historical context here. This is work done by Dr. Atul Joshi. And what he did was he went to the British office, India office of the British Library, and, sort of went through all the old correspondence to see what the Nilgiris look like. And so this actually is a picture of Ooty from the early 1800s. And as described by Sir Thomas Munro, who was the governor of the Madras presidency then, he says, the hills are as smooth as the lawns in an English park, and there's hardly any one of them which has not a mass of dark wood culminating suddenly as if it had been planted. So this is actually what is currently Ooty town. That's Ooty Lake there. And as you can see, 200 years ago, this used to be these mismanagement, and they wanted to clothe or reclothe these hills. And so pretty much that's what they started to do. So this, if anybody has been to Ooty, this is actually St. Stephen's Cathedral. And this is what it looked like in 1834. You can see mostly grassland and a few trees. By 1851, it sort of looked like this. By the early 1900s, it was pretty much wooded all over. And this is what it looks like in 2015. So what was originally a grassland is now completely a wooded patch of land, right? And as I said, as the colonial foresters thought that it was important to recrow these grass areas, they actually introduced more than 40 species of trees. This is just a list of all the different species that they introduced at different points in time. And of these, most of them did not actually establish, some of them plantations, but 3 of them in particular have become majorly invasive in the grasslands. All of these are woody plants. One is a tree, which is black wattle Acacia Munzii, and the other 2 are shrubs, which are gorse and Scotch brooms, and all 3 are nitrogen fixers, right? And the problem is, actually, the colonial foresters realized very quickly that wattle was a problem, even within 5 to 6 years after introducing it in the mid 1800s. They had flagged it as being a problematic species. But anyway, this is a photo of the upper Nilgiris. I don't know if you can see it, but this bright green patch in the middle is a shola, or the native forest, all that dirty green around it. used to be grassland, but that's now invaded by these woody plants, right? So clearly, these invasives have taken over large parts of the landscapes and estimated this work by Dr. Robin Vijayan Arsamani and their group from ISA Tirupati, that about 70% of the grasslands have been lost to these invasives and also to plantations, non-invasive but exotic plantations, over the last several decades. So one of the things that we've been looking at, not one of the things, many of the things that we've been looking at is trying to understand what are the impact these invasives are having on the functioning of these ecosystems. So we looked at patterns of species diversity. This is just a graph which is showing species richness in grasslands, and then adjacent to that in invaded or plantations. Invaded patches, either invaded by acacia, gorse, or in plantations by eucalyptus, pine, and so on. And as you can see, there's much lower native species richness, both grasses and forbs in invaded areas compared to uninvaded areas. Invasion has also changed the community composition in the understory. These are NMDS plots. I'm not going to go into detail, but essentially, each circle tells you, it's sort of circumscribing a community. And if the circles don't overlap or if they're different, then it's saying you have different communities. So the understory of acacia invaded patches tends to be different from adjacent grasslands. Same thing with citruses and Scotch broom and gorse and many of the other invasives too. Right? Now, here's an important thing. These, as I mentioned, these invasives are all nitrogen fixers, and we don't have too many native nitrogen fixers in these habitats. And because they're capable of fixing nitrogen, they've been altering the nitrogen economy of these grasslands. So this is a graph which is showing nitrogen availability over time. In, the solid line is the grassland, and all the dotted lines are invaded, patches invaded by gorse, wattle, and Scotch broom. And as you can see, there's much higher nitrogen availability now in the grasslands than was before as a result of this invasion. So in a sense, these invasives are starting to fertilize these grasslands. And when you have more nitrogen available, there's also more nitrogen being lost from the system. So, Ferrell and Atri have been monitoring streams and stream flow and stream chemistry in multiple catchments that have been invaded to different degrees by wattle. And this is a graph which actually is showing you how much of nitrate is flowing out of streams in the wet season. So on the left, you have a grassland-dominated catchment. On the extreme right, you have a shola-dominated catchment. And the two plots in the middle are from wattle-dominated catchments. And these are, on the x-axis, just a plot over time. And the blue bars are, I guess, the wet season. And the lines actually show how much of nitrate is flowing out over time. As you can see from grassland-dominated catches and catchments and shola-dominated catchments, you see a small peak in the amount of nitrate that's flowing out of streams during the wet season. But if you look at the wattle-dominated catchments, you see this peak is really high. So essentially what's happening is these nitrogen fixers are bringing in nitrogen into the system. There's an increase in nitrogen availability. There's also an increase in nitrate availability, which is quite mobile. And this nitrate is finding its way into streams and it's flowing downstream, right? And nitrate has, so this has the potential to eutrophy water bodies downstream. Currently, the values are not too high. It's not past EPA standards to be considered problematic, but it's still quite high. So it can have downstream consequences, the nitrate in these streams. And the woody plant invasions has also changed fire regimes in these habitats. Now, this is a figure. This is a DNBR, a remotely sensed image of fire scars. And, if fires burn more intensely, you're going to have darker fire scars. And that's essentially what this is showing. And we mapped, the invasives here, and we looked at the fire scar intensity. And it turns out that where you have invasives, you tend to have fires that are also burning with much greater intensity than in grasslands, right? So essentially what we are having is these habitats are getting invaded by these N fixers, And these woody plant invasions tends to have has resulted in lower native plant species richness. It has altered plant community composition and also homogenized plant communities. So they tend to be much more similar across space than before. Woody plant invasions altered ecosystem carbon, nutrient, as well as hydrological cycles. And it's also altered fire regimes by increasing fire intensity, right? So all of these put together suggests that, these invasions have fundamentally altered the way that these ecosystems are currently functioning. And so what actually allows these woody plants to invade these grasslands? We've been working on this question too quite a bit. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but we've actually carried out experiments to actually test some of these. And it turns out that the ability to tolerate frost and freezing temperatures is a very key determinant of the ability of these woody plants to actually invade these grasslands. Most of the native plants typically die over winter because they're unable to tolerate these low temperatures and the occurrence of frost, which happens in the grasslands but doesn't happen within the shoulder patches. But all three invasives are able to do so. And so that is a huge factor influencing their ability to invade these grasslands. They also have very high fecundity and potentially colonization ability. We haven't actually tested it, but it's likely that they're also good colonizers. And one of the things we've also carried out experimental warming treatments to show that under a warmer climate, the problem with these invasions is going to become even further. It's going to become even worse, right? So, as of now, these are the main factors that we think are primarily driving the ability of these plants to invade these systems. And it looks like this problem is likely to become worse in the future. And most of our work actually has concentrated on wattle. And the Tamil Nadu government has actually started on this program to remove wattle from these landscapes. We can talk about how effective that's going to be a little later on. But essentially, what we've been observing over the years, in the last 10 or so years that we've been working in this system, is suddenly it seems like gorse seems to be getting out of control. So this is a patch of grassland that didn't have any gorse about 4 years before this, and this is what it looks like today. So we're not really sure what's driving this sudden increase in gorse expansion, but it's something that we probably need to be concerned about because we're not really sure what's happening here, right? And so with that, I just thought I'd like just throw out a little bit of the work that we've done talking about the potential impacts of invasives in these landscapes. And I'd like to thank the Tamil Nadu Forest Department for all their help and permits, Atri and Ferrell for all, the hydrology work, and funding sources from NCBS, Department of Atomic Energy, SERB, Ministry of Earth Science, and the RM Tulpule Charitable Trust, and all our partners in the field. So hopefully I've managed to keep time. So thank you very much. With that, I will stop, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mahesh, thank you, really. That can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a synopsis of a rather favorite biome where I've worked and actually tried with Vasant Bosco to remove gorse and tried multiple methods and stood there saying we should all collect and get the wattle out and get the gorse out and let's get the grasslands back. And meanwhile, 20 years later, the trends are so clear that there is this phenomenon of nitrogen loving plants taking over the landscape. That is simply just a fact, that is happening. And that you've really presented that well. And I think that's just going to there's going to be a lot of discussion around that. So thank you, Mahesh.
Welcome.
I think at this point we're thinking it might be nice to bring in some reflections or questions from the audience. Arjun or Mandeep, do you want to just do that?
Before that, just a request to the audience. If you could drop your questions in the Q&A button, it should be somewhere close to where the chat button is. It's easier for us to manage questions and then mark them as answered. So for those of you who've dropped your questions in the chat, if you could just drop them in the Q&A button, not button, the panel, that would be great. So far we have 3 questions, Suprabha. I believe the first one is addressed to Dr. Rohan because it came in during his presentation. From someone who's anonymous. They're asking how and why plant invasions change soil nutrients.
Maybe I'll just illustrate with our own example. So in case of Norway spruce as such, spruce has got needles. They're very acidic. So when spruce drops its needles and also its pine cones, it really acidifies the soils around itself. Now, it's a good strategy for survival for spruce itself because it is by its own nature a very acid tolerant species. And it's a good way to compete with others because nobody can really tolerate a pH of 3 or 4 apart from spruce. And so, yes, that's how they really modify the soil pH and make our soils very acidic. At the same time, they can also grow in very polluted soils. So one of the reasons why foresters in the 70s, 80s preferred spruce because they ended up making a lot of green landscapes, but they were just spruce monocultures. And so spruce did very well in acidic soils. It also acidified the soils. And that's how it really modified the ecosystems. And I must say that when I heard Dr. Sankaran, there are so many parallels in terms of soil chemistry. Now, we also have a lot of excess nitrates in our soil because of over either pollution, which is just miscontexted chemicals, or because of nutrition, largely urea and nitrates, which were pumped into the ecosystem, which has now uh, made our invaders successful. So yes, that's how largely the soil paradigm shifts and then the vegetation paradigm shifts. If that answers the question.
Thanks, Dr. Rohan, and thanks, Anonymous. If you have a follow-up question, you can ask. Meanwhile, we'll move on to the next question. Another one for you, Dr. Rohan. Aishwarya, it's from Aishwarya. And she's asking that considering the fact that the European Union already has a well-established approach to restoration and invasive species management, unlike India, what do you think would have been the case had a similar situation happened in India? Would the approach be the same, or what should be the approach in the Indian context? She's asking.
Well, maybe let me just slightly correct you over there. The Europeans have many policies. Does not mean that they are right. So let me be very upfront about it, that they have made blunderous mistakes in the past. Just because they have policies does not mean that they are right. And every ecologist in Europe will tell you that even as of now, with all the policies, ecologists and foresters don't get along because foresters are the ones managing large landscapes and they think they know ecology, whereas ecologists are trying to make resilient landscapes. And there is a big debate between what is rewilding, I mean, letting the ecosystems do its own thing and do its own corrections without human intervention. And then there is a lot of talk of structured restoration, which has its own policy level debate. So let me tell you, there is enough confusion in Europe in itself. So don't think that they have it right. Now, what will happen in the Indian context? I don't think it is anything different because really our lack of understanding of forest ecosystems is, I think, uniform across India and Europe. So I don't think any of us have really the solution. I think the only solution is to be honest about your observations, be like correct as you go policy, and after a certain level of correction is achieved, I think the best thing is to let nature take over, because even as of now, I feel that invasives, it's more like a symptom, and doing aggressive changes. I mean, I've also done a lot of restoration projects in the US, wherein we have spent really billions trying to do weeding, trying to do controlled fire burns, and they don't work because we have not fundamentally gone to the root of the problem. So, and somewhere, if you have to go to the root of the problem, I always say follow the humans, because somewhere around invasion biology, there is that human touch which has altered the ecosystem either by pollution, either by toxicity, or translocating A species to B species. We had a small project in Hawaii, and there we are having a problem with mongoose and crows, which are from India, classically taken there by the British. So wherever there is a massive invasion problem, I always say that look into the close human history, and perhaps that is where you will find the roots of invasion. So if that answers the question.
Thanks, Dr. Rohan. Thank you for that. In fact, I think we had a similar question from Ankita, who was asking if all invasives can be traced back to human presence and action, and if there are any other ways in which invasive species get introduced. But thanks for that. We'll just quickly, in the interest of time, we'll just quickly take one for Dr. Mahesh right now, and then we'll get to the rest of the questions after the discussion. So, Dr. Mahesh, someone again anonymous is asking, how does the high rate of leaching affect the people or the water quality in these places, given these species have been there for many decades now? This person's also curious why the Tamil Nadu government is interested in removal of invasives.
Well, like I said, there is nitrate leaching, but I think the amounts right now are not, at least based on EPA standards, it's not, the water quality is still fine, it's still potable. But again, that's just based on the measurements we have from the catchments that we monitor, right? I don't know about full, if you go downstream, what the water quality is going to be. But I think that there is enough nitrate to lead to eutrophication of water bodies. Like, so if you look at the dams and stuff like that, there's going to be enough nitrate to lead to eutrophication there. And why has it? So what was the second part of the question? Something about time, right?
The
Why
Tamil
did
Nadu. So the first question ends with this consideration that these species have been around for many decades. The second
Yes, been around, but I think the forest department used to have more very actively manage them in the past, which they're not doing anymore, I think. And so, you know, the extent of wattle invasion is increasing for all of these species. And as for the Tamil Nadu government, I guess people here at the ERA will know better than that, but it's a High Court order that actually asks them to deal with, I think they're dealing with 5 species right now, to find some solution to get rid of them. Prosopis, lantana, senna, wattle, and I'm not sure what the 5th is, but yeah, it's just a High Court order, given that invasives are becoming a huge problem.
Thank you, Dr. Mahesh, and thank you, Anonymous, for your question. Suprabha, do you think we can take another one, or do you think we should start with Aliston?
Well, you're the timekeeper, so
I think we'll take the rest of the questions after
later.
the
Yeah.
presentations
Okay.
and the discussion.
Okay. So pleasure to see Aliston here on this session. I call him up every few weeks because I have a very nerdy question that I want him to answer. And the interesting thing that I find is that he's trained as an engineer and then asks all these very deep and old questions like across time and space, and then is right now in Tamil Nadu making a water body and is off to Yale, I think. And so I would like to invite Aliston to share, you know, the range of his thought and perceptions. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you for inviting me and having me here. It was nice to hear about these long-term research by Rohan and Mahesh just now. And I guess, you know, I want my perspective has always been my tangible, the things that I have worked with personally. And So my perspective will focus mostly around that. I haven't done any large-scale academic research. It's just managing my little farm in the low mid-altitude central Western Ghats, which is the Dakshin Kannada, and then travels around the rest of the further north from there, which is all the coastal and the lowland and mid-altitude landscapes, which is like wet tropical. Um, so when I first started, I left engineering and when I moved straight to this. And I also initially was chasing this idea of like this is an enemy figure. Invasives are, in my mind at least, it was clear that they're not doing a role, but this was long before I actually immersed and understood the interconnections, like say a plant has with everything around it, the air, the water. And so to I'll start with my observations, and then I maybe I can draw out possible root causes from that. So one of the first ones I remember was enjoying lantana and prosopis with a little chromolenum, and it was a very windy landscape, and we were on the edge of a hill. And I didn't really know that they were invasives, just that I knew that they were unusual there compared to the rest of the landscape. But because it was very windy, I had and I went in the under scrub. I found that no, like the wind was so heavy, just a few meters across, and the moment I'm inside, it had completely uh, almost nothing, meaning I could barely feel it. So immediately I began to sense that, okay, it's fulfilling a function. This was like a felt sense, not anything that I had deeply understood. And later on, I realized that this is an invasive, but um, my practical experience with it was I enjoyed the little, buffer it created from the wind so that I could actually open my eyes, actually, because the wind was so heavy because we were at the top of a hill. After that, as I was working in different landscapes, I began to notice certain features of certain invasives. Obviously, these are the small, prominent ones in India and not tree types, but we have the acacia there. And there was something about the way they were growing across the landscape. They were more prone to hillsides, though that is variable, and I've seen them differently since in other places. But overall, the idea that different kinds settle near the valleys, different near the ridges, and if I saw a rocky outcrop over the years, I've seen that these observations have stacked up on each other. And so, if there's a rocky outcrop, I would see a different bunch, and if there was a basin which was not like a valley, not prone to erosion, there was a whole different bunch. Um, Another, again, anecdotal example is we had a little bit of construction waste, and it was just piled at a certain place, and there was some paint and cement, I guess, and anything else that may have been in the waste. And I observed that place over years, not with any intent, but just it being there and constantly in my view. And I noticed that a particular set of invasives chose that spot to grow. And there were other invasives, so-called invasives, which didn't grow in that spot. So immediately the inference I could make was that, and all around they were not there, but just at this spot. And they kept coming year after year, no matter what we did. Uh, because the waste was not eventually removed, it was just left there. So that was another thing that this niche specificity, there is some interaction where they're choosing certain niches. So this struck me as quite profound at that point. And over the years, just watching these and like stacking up with other observations, it became clear that this was definitely a characteristic. And again, I'm speaking about a very local scale, obviously not large, like extremely large landscapes. But I feel there's some message there into their ecological role, their function. Another thing I remember, and it's so easy to observe, is that night lights, right? So the light regime that we have introduced has changed the way plants near the lights operate or evolve, right? So something about where when I see like very bright, especially the white one, the white kind of light, not the old, I think it's called the sodium lamps, which is orange, which was there like 20 years ago, but now everything's converted to this, right? This white LED. And there's something I observed about the plants around there. Not only did trees put an extra branch towards the light, but there was also this preference of all these tall, lanky shrubs or the undershrubs or the even the low-lying plants to around the light lamppost to just show, meaning there was a little bulge, which was quite different from everywhere else. So the farther away I went from the light, the same plants performed differently. And so there was something about this that again correlates with the previous one, which is that it's a very localized thing. And yes, there is a global thing that allows them to germinate, but there are, I think, these human aspects, these human environments we have created contribute a lot to them getting an edge over the others, being able to go to seed, for example, faster than the slower growing our choice species, preferred species. Another thing I noticed was when I was working in Sharavati, there was a lot of river courses where there was one side of the river which was undisturbed, and there was another side which had frequent disturbance. In the sense that this is with respect to Wedelia, and people wanting to constantly do something about it, spray glyphosate or hand mow it, and at a certain point, even get a earth mower to just like remove everything and burn everything. And I noticed that the next year they just came back like as if, nothing shifted. But just it's like a riverside in the dry season, you can just cross over the bank walking. It's not even 2 meters across. But in the wet season, it's a fairly gushing stream. And on the other side of the bank, which was untouched, there was not a single Wedelia that managed to take root. Considering that, a small piece of Wedelia will create that effect, I would imagine just, the other side of the bank is not such a great leap for it to take, right? And it struck me again as quite, uh, I was very amazed, and I kept watching that. Again, for all of these, I had pictures, but I couldn't find them quick enough. I didn't have the bandwidth to go through all of my photos. Um, and in because I mainly farm coffee, so there was a lot of times where I made a lot of compost. This is another example where when I had finished making my compost, I noticed that throughout the process, when it was half done, there were lots of weeds germinating, and when the compost was fully done, somehow nothing germinated, and it was left to the elements and everything being the same. Now, what is fully done compost? That's a topic for another time, but I feel this is more, this observation is relevant here. There's another thing that happens in our landscapes, which is power lines. So we are advised to not put anything under power lines, especially citrus or avocados. There are some trees I've seen over the years that do well even under power lines, but many don't. And moving from all this, you've seen how I've gone from the most coarse to the most subtle. I think the most subtle that I've seen is our modern environments. Everything from the power lines giving those electricity, but like it's usually transmitted at 50 to 60 hertz. I'm like, as I observe, I'm very sure that this has contributes to plant. I mean, it affects plant growth. Then there's also we are inundated with cell towers and all kinds of gadgets with put out an EMF, an electromagnetic field. And I have since researched and seen many papers on this. Like there are people already researching this. And the load, so now coming to putting all this together, I feel there's our modern environments are now inundated with rare earths. This is a recent phenomena, and heavy metals, which is quite old since the industrial times, right? And there are two, like there's lead, which is a very important story, I feel. because in spite of it killing more than 1 million people worldwide, we still seem to have gone upwards in the production, and in spite of knowing all its damaging effects to cell health and everything above, all kinds of biological systems. It's added to military uses a lot of it, but even many aircrafts, they've removed it since they've made unleaded petrol illegal, and this is one of their, they say, their major achievements. It was funded by the UN, and finally now it's not there in any passenger vehicles. But I think, like, if you see the other places where it's there, it's still not removed in some types of paint. Even in some countries in Africa, it's possible to get this in petrol as well. And many aircraft still don't remove lead, and especially for military shipping and any other large-scale industrial activity, they still add lead to petrol to improve its efficiency. So instead of introducing a technological thing like a catalytic converter, which they have done to cars, they seem to still run on the old thing and still add lead. So now this is one major heavy metal which is there in all places. So I was very surprised that to find papers on this and see that no one's talking about this. So coming to the possible root causes, I feel that we have this modern environment, which is a centralizing infrastructure. So we have the military, industrial effluents and everything there forth, right? The shipping, the transport, vehicular, aircraft. And now we have satellites, which is the fields that they are creating. I mean, we just don't know. So I think it's good to factor and widen our lens to accommodate more of these phenomena and see how these phenomena may be actually aiding some over the others. And there was something that really struck me, which my wife told me, which she has worked with chemicals. And she said there are so many lab chemicals that actually don't reach the market, but they're regularly flushed down the drain in the laboratory itself. And because of the centralizing infrastructure we have, there's nothing done about it. It just goes straight to the place where everything else goes. And I assume like some of these, like especially the fluorine compounds or the chlorine compounds, go back to the atmosphere and are then brought down in another place by rain. Some of these effects are localized, but some of them are global also because of the wind patterns and some of the larger biosphere level phenomena, right? So we have this centralizing infrastructure, and then we have this dispersing infrastructure, right? First, the roads go to the most remote places, and with the centralized infrastructure, we create these compounds and then transfer them or take them to places where they are completely novel. And then we transport the seeds also, and we transport the pathogens also, possible pathogens to the native species, let's say. Um, and so we have the centralizing one and we have the dispersing one. And now the dispersing one has gone to a civilian level, meaning it's each one of us are now like advertised or marketed a whole bunch of products that it seems innocuous, but like the more research that comes out, it's like the story of PFAS. It's it's shown to be completely. They did this they did a study with corn, I think, where they showed that it completely affected, completely disrupted the cell communication at parts per trillion, right? We're still at most of the products, they're only measuring for parts per million or parts per billion. But we're seeing something that changes the signaling level. At a signaling level, it's changing things at parts per trillion. So, and now this is there in the lining of all plastic, anything plastic we use, it's there in all the waterproofing gear, any camera or anything that requires any waterproofing, it's there. And in India, we have this specific thing of, everybody has this pan or tobacco and they throw this everywhere. The lining of that packet is PFAS. And the cleaners that are used in most homes also contain some of either a combination or either of a fluorine or a chlorine compound. Then the polishes they use, the plastics, the dioxins. So all of this, when you see the sum total of it, there's also pharma, right? The SSRIs, the antibiotics, the steroids. All of this is not completely absorbed by the system, but mostly passes through the drain. And so it's easy to look at a complex system and work backwards through reduction, which is what I did earlier, to prove that one parameter had this effect linearly, right? But how much do we understand of the complexity? And it's not just a snapshot, it's not just a complex system, but it's the complex adaptive system. It's adaptability with respect to time. And how much do we know about the combined effect of simultaneous disturbances, many of them not so obvious, many of them subtle, right? Um, so the deeper I've looked into life forms, it becomes impossible for me to define where, first of all, one thing ends, one organism ends, and where another begins. And so we're all bathed in this, the fundamental air and water and earth and fire is a shared thing, right? There are some things that are localized, like I mentioned earlier, but there's a global thing also happening. So in a sense, I'd like to end with how much of our ways of looking at it may seem a little myopic in the sense that we are probably just looking at a small subset, and the more we widen our lens, how much of it could play a factor. And so before we come up with a solution, I feel there's a lot of these like mechanisms, like why a certain plant may translocate um, a certain heavy metal and which part of the plant it translocates it to. And so I've seen a particular research. I think I'll tie it up because I'm way past my time. But I saw a particular bit of research where a certain heavy metal was translocated to the flower. So the flower actually chose the plant actually chose to translocate it to the flower so that a pollinator would come and take it away from the place there. Now, why that may be so is still up for debate or even discussion. But yeah, that was a very surprising thing that, there's an intelligence that probably we are just beginning to appreciate. Yeah, that's that's all I can because I've, 2 minutes over time. So I guess 15 minutes is too less for this, but yeah, that's the gist. Thank you.
Aliston,
And
thanks so
yeah.
much. This kind of this graphic of a centralizing system and then the decentralizing, the dispersing system, I think it's very, very useful to look at how we're spreading, but we're also like building momentum in certain areas with certain this complex of things. I think that's a very useful graphic.
Mhm.
And in the discussion that we're hoping that will now start up, I think we can return to some things that you feel you would like to address. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone who's into farming and looking at all these things and restoration at the nitty-gritty level, I would heartily recommend that you connect with Aliston. Mandeep?
Yes.
So you want to tell us about Kaustubh, the update?
Yes, so unfortunately, Kaustav, who was our fourth panelist, will not be able to make it. He's got viral fever. It's the flu season. And he was planning to come, but then seems like he's not well enough. So that changes things up a bit. We can move on to a brief Q&A for Aliston. I believe there's a question for Aliston. And then we can get back to the discussion. Aliston, so there's a question from Vedika. She's asking, she acknowledges that she may have missed it if you said it already, but what is your theory as to why the Wedelia did not take root on the other side of the bank?
Yeah, I mean, I've just observed it now for a few years, and it's my observation was the other side of the bank wasn't cultivated. Not even a single machine went over. There was no vehicular movement. It was in the other side of the bank, and there was no road to that side. And yeah, it struck me as very surprising that, a plant can just do this on this side, and then the moment you have no, and it was also an intact system, more or less. There was ginger cultivation about 8 years ago, and this is deep in the Sharavati range. If you're not familiar, it's somewhere in the central Western Ghats and a little in the midland, so not coastal. Yeah, and yeah, I guess I don't really have an explanation, but my observation was that place was relatively intact, and this place had multiple years of trying to address it through chemical or mechanical or other means.
Thank you, Aliston, and thanks, Vedika, for asking. Shailaja has a remark for you. She agrees that 15 minutes is too less. So, yeah, she says this is mind-blowing work, Aliston. I think we have only one question directed specifically to Aliston. And since he's answered it, I think, Suprabha, we can move on to the discussion.
There's another question, or you
No,
mentioned?
I meant
Okay,
the one
fine. Yeah.
that was
Okay.
just answered.
So I think we're going to have a few minutes where now it's the four of us. Also, maybe Mandeep and Arjun can join. That we can just maybe take some of these questions that we have for each other, perhaps a little bit deeper, and then we'll open it out for another round of contributions and questions from the larger, audience. And there's quite a few people here today, so it's over 100 people, so that's really nice. So I live in a place that's devoted to gardening and to gardening native species and plant conservation and so on. And, what plants need in terms of nutrients is the fundamental question that, at a very basic level, at the level of a farmer maybe, or just growing plants that we're just sort of asking on a day-to-day basis. Do they need compost? Do they need, some like a little bit of iron, or is the pH too less or too little, or is it too rich, the soil? I was just wondering if we can just hone in, and if the three of you can respond in turn about nutrition in a landscape. Just take it a little bit further from what, so there's a general understanding that a lot of compost is good for plants, and so Mahesh has gone into this huge thing of heavy nitrification of an entire ecosystem. And Rohan, you've been talking about nutrient availability as a fundamental issue. Now there goes Aliston, going into little micro things as to what plants may benefit from and what they might be affected by. So can you just go into that a little bit, because it's going to help us actually grow, and it's going to help us address plants when we come to restoration. Whoever, Mahesh, you want to start?
Sure, I can, unless Rohan wants to go.
No, please start. I do have to say a few little things and also bring in a few points to the discussion, but I'll follow. Please,
Okay. Yeah.
Start.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around the question and get it a little bit more focused. So if you're talking about, well, most plants need the same kind of nutrients, right? Maybe in different levels, but they need nitrogen, they need phosphorus, and so on. And the difference, there's a fundamental difference between nitrogen and phosphorus, is that nitrogen comes in from the atmosphere. So ecosystems typically don't have it at the start. And as the succession progresses, the plants actually bring in nitrogen. Phosphorus, on the other hand, gets lost from the system over time because it doesn't cycle. It doesn't have an atmospheric component. So early on, young communities tend to be nitrogen limited and old communities tend to be phosphorus limited. And so I think, so when you have nutrient poor communities, then potentially nitrogen fixers can come in there and do their thing, right? So I think that's one of what we're seeing in these places is many of these systems that tend to be more or less nutrient poor is where the nitrogen, but they presumably have enough phosphorus that the nitrogen fixers are able to come in, and they're altering the dynamics at that level. But in terms of the other things like, I don't know, selenium, lead and stuff and so on, I think it's just different species have different abilities to deal with it. Some of them can actually exude or deal with those high levels of heavy metals. Others cannot. And I guess it just depends on what kinds of environments those plants evolved in, right? I don't think necessarily that the ability to do so, well, maybe it might give you an ability to invade like for example, heavy metal patches or whatever like that, right? So yeah, and we know that most of these invasive tend to be fast growing, so they tend to take up nutrients and water very rapidly from the soil, and presumably in doing so, they also take up all the other. If they don't have a mechanism to actually actively exude or exclude these heavy metals, they're going to end up taking up the heavy metals too. And those that can survive and deal with the heavy metals probably will remain. Those that can't probably will not establish in those systems. But again, it's not my area of expertise. I don't work on heavy metals and plants, but I'm not even sure if I addressed the question or I just went off on a rant. But anyhow, yeah.
It had to do with nutrient loads, right?
Yeah, too much nutrients is a bad thing, right? And we know that when you have too many nutrients, most plants are not able to, they get nitrogen burn, they're not able to grow there. And you have to reduce the nutrient level. So for example, Suprabha, just taking up on a point that you mentioned, if you want to restore these shoulder grasslands back to those native communities, we're going to have to find ways to actually reduce nutrient levels. How do you do it? You probably have to keep harvesting, plants still, the nutrients are moved out of the system. It's not going to be an easy task. Yeah. To reduce nutrient levels. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Right. Rohan, you want to respond?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, certainly. I mean, just to take it forward again, I don't have enough credible data. It's largely observational. I've seen different systems from the US to Europe to the work in the Western Ghats. One common underlying denominator is that a nutrition deficient system is a more resilient system. So slightly where you have got less than optimal nutrition, whatever is growing there usually tends to do a better job. Excessive nutrition is pollution, basically flat off. This is something that I've seen across all ecosystems. So when I say excess nitrates, maybe I also use the term slightly more loosely. It also means that it's not just the NO3 component or that nitrate. I'm saying all the excess proteins, all the excess complex unused proteins in a system usually cause invasions to come. Now, I've also been reading up a little bit about what happens if the invasion is not checked. What is the end point for an invasion? So let me also tell you, a lot of studies report, and they can be insect outbreaks. Now, just yesterday, my own PhD student, she just published a paper about bioaccumulation of mercury in spruce, because spruce is kind of our hero and the villain of the region that we are working on over here. And so what we kind of now find that after a certain point, invasion will eat up upon itself. There will be a point where in the invader cannot sustain its own population, and that's where the whole break-off happens. Now, if we have to kind of see this slightly from a chemical ecology viewpoint, there is a certain behavior I always kind of, when I'm discussing this with my own PhD students, I take the concept of pioneering and invasion, because both of them have got this common underlying factor of occupying a certain space and time very rapidly. But what is the fundamental difference between pioneering and invasion? So pioneering is where you still have a R way of behavior. R is basically the ability to reproduce very quickly, convert inorganic chemicals in an ecosystem, make it organically available, and then make way for more complex and slow growing organisms in a certain ecosystem. Now, invasion also has a certain similarity with our type of behavior. So at a certain point, any invader also populates the place very, very quickly. Now, this populating the place certainly has its own problems with the natives, because it is going to reduce biodiversity, it is going to reduce many other things, but it is actually consuming the excessive nutrition that is lying in that ecosystem. So that is where, I mean, that is the premise with which I say that invasives are actually a symptom and not the problem. So I'm not saying that you must let the invasive grow and then eventually in time the ecosystem might correct itself. But what I'm trying to say is that an excessive high nitrate situation causes or paves way for invasion. Invasion in itself is a symptom of either high toxicity or high nutrition. And wherever we have to correct anything, usually the problem is with nutrition. We have to reduce the amount of chemical load in the system, and then slowly and steadily, slightly aggressively and slightly surgically, the ecosystem will start correcting itself in a lag effect. That's how I would summarize it in the large picture. Yeah.
Great, Rohan. Thanks. Aliston?
Oh yeah, I mean, what Mahesh and Rohan said, definitely there's a significant contributor of nutrients. But I was thinking, you said something about compost, but I think what you meant was manure, which is a nitrate rich, or because well done compost is humus, right? And that's long chain carbon, which actually locks up all this and doesn't allow it to be simply there anywhere. Meaning it locks it up in long chain carbon bonds and only gives it when a plant asks for it, right? So I think when you said compost, good compost actually, like I said, doesn't allow many of the species that are problematic to take over. Yeah, that's all. I mean, but the whole idea is once they establish, then these high nutrient loads definitely contribute. They're able to metabolize it faster than the ones that we want. And so they're able to go to seed faster. I presume like over generations that would give them an edge over the natives, right?
Yeah, just to clarify, I did mean compost because I think composting materials and how they break down, forest plants are actually quite specific about what you put into the compost. Like when you have a nursery, I think the starter culture of the compost is quite critical to the survival of germinating and so on. So if you're using tea leaves, they're not going to like it. If you're going to use so we've been quite careful about that, especially with a lot of small species that they have certain likes and dislikes with compost itself.
Yeah.
So
can I just add a point here, Suprabha? Just
yeah, please.
So I don't know much about compost, but if you're talking about, I think that there may be 2 points here. One is, so if you look at the nitrogen cycle, plants, when they bring out their litter, it's organic. And then that gets broken down to inorganic forms like ammonium nitrate and stuff, which is what most plants take up. There's been evidence that plants do take up organic nitrogen too in the form of proteins and stuff like that. But, and I think the whole problem with, and that's a slower cycle. And the whole problem with inorganic fertilizer is you just go there and you dump. So you're just breaking that cycle from the plant. But there are also other things like secondary compounds which the plants have, right? Which also come into the soil, which they either using it against defense against herbivores or for whatever reason. So there's a whole bit of nitrogen availability, plus there's also this bit of these secondary compounds which can inhibit or not inhibit or favor plants. So I think it might help to actually look at the two things separately, that nutrient availability versus these secondary metabolites. Yeah.
Yeah. I have this fact that I keep sort of, in every discussion, I put it up as an alarm call kind of thing, which is, 60 million tons of urea put out in the Indian landscape per year. That's from the Indian statistical whatever, website. And that is every year. So that's go ahead, Aliston.
You were also mentioning, Suprabha, the other day about how they have concentrated animals, and like the whole livestock thing is also creating this other form of nitrogen, which is the poop, which is also in concentrated forms all over. Yeah, but go on, sorry.
Yeah, so these there are massive offloads from the human system of various forms of nitrogen, whether it's from roads and the tar, or whether it's a bunched up grazing is what I've been kind of interested to see. That our wild areas are getting smaller, and either they have a lot of cows roaming freely in them, or they have also just bunched up grazers. because they don't have the freedom to move in much larger places. And the third, of course, is just from the rain itself that's transporting various forms of nitrogen. And the fourth is this fertilizer crazy culture. The modern culture is a result partly of the Haber-Bosch, that process has been fundamental to delivering ammonium or ammonia, whatever, you'll have to correct me, into the landscape and the water and the air at a global scale in a very short period of time. So it means that plants are having to grapple with something rather new in their own evolution. It's at a scale unprecedented because it's not the same as compost, actually. So, I think we can just move on with. So, just one point that I wanted to add to that is, grasslands. It seems that diversity, and also in the rainforest, it's clear that diversity is not prefers something that's low on nutrients. That more diverse grasslands with orchids and impatiens and so on actually have lower nitrogen, and from my limited understanding. So if people are aiming to restore, what are they? What are we aiming to restore? What is the complex of species that we're aiming to restore, and what do each of these species need, and at which point in the evolution of this particular landscape? Because the land itself is changing with all our involvement. So I think there are very complicated things to look at. So one further question before we go into the audience or the participants is the nature of disturbance itself. And from my whatever trawling of the net I have done, I feel like there's such a polemic on this issue of invasives but it's interesting that actually that academia, it's also quite varied, and there's many opinions on this based on research as to whether they should be regarded as bad, or whether they should be, how do we regard these plants? Because the one thing that we can all agree on, or many people can agree on, is that largely, in most instances, it is pretty heavy disturbance that is prior to the movement of these plants, of these fast-moving plants. There is usually some disturbance. And it's already centuries of agriculture, it's shipping, it's urbanization, and so on. So can the three of you just explore that a little bit? Disturbance, how is it actually sending plants this way or that way? What is it doing to native species? Who wants to go with that?
A thought came. I'll give my view. I feel like over the years, just observing, and now I have settled with this idea, and it's obviously open to further explorations. Is I feel when I see them, I see that nature is kind of doing this. It's conspiring on this epic cover-up act for what we have done, and instead of seeing them as allies, we seem to be vilifying them. Somehow, I think we need to understand the ecological function more before we can come to a particular idea. But but everything that we want our species to do, like create habitat, build soil, hold nutrients, all these things that are so valuable, this plant seems to be doing it by itself. And I feel there's there's a message in that. And yeah. So something that struck me is the fact that they can germinate is dependent on so many variables, right? And the fact that they germinate, but not the others, meaning they're responding to the light and to light initially, but water. So the quality of water is toxified. Even if it comes by rain, PFAS can be transmitted through taken to Antarctica. I mean, they did a recent study where Antarctica, they found PFAS, and they found lead all over the world. So there's something about this that feels to me that needs to be explored. So when I look at them, I feel like, okay, they're probably allies. They're doing this great job for us. And so how do we actually use them in the system? But yeah, I mean, this is just my opinion. Many people will be meaning there's almost a a need to do something actionable, and and so there's not enough time for the explorations of the philosophical or the scientific. People like to want something tangible to be to act upon. Yeah, but that's
Rohan or Mahesh? Rohan? Okay, you want
Maybe just a small story again. To begin with, I'll say I don't have a clear answer. I don't know. That's the scientist inside me being very, very absolute and real. But maybe just to share observations, and again, this is an observation, take it with a pinch of salt. So 2022, we got our disturbance very profoundly. It was a forest fire. 6 of our forest plots, research plots, they all got burnt away. I mean, uh, the picture that I showed you. And then it was just this 2 weeks after this massive disturbance, climate change slash anthropogenic slash give it whatever, mix of all of that happened to us. And then it was just a kind of a tragic day. We were all walking through our forest and it was completely black. Half of the trees burned, many parts of like animals and reindeers burning here and there. Our security dogs trying to find whatever they can as meat inside that barbecue that was happened. And then after a few days, we were thinking back to ourselves that, okay, a big chunk of spruce has actually died out. Should we be happy about it, or should we be sad about it? And then I mean, the more you walk through these lands, the more you will understand that it is a continual process. So then naming any disturbance as good or bad, I would say, what is it in your context of restoration? Now, we see that in some patches where the lime was actually well set, we see regeneration of little beech and little oak, and we are happy about it. There are big chunks of our forest which is still having very low pH, and mostly it will be spruce that will be regenerating in a natural order. But that is a time where we can get a chance and will actually remove the topsoil and start rejuvenating our seed banks or the soil seed banks with more beech nuts and oak nuts, and see what happens after the next few rains. So I think that this restoration dilemma, that what are we restoring to, because we cannot restore something to the past. I think we are trying to rejuvenate something into a very resilient future, which can hold a certain amount of diversity. Now, in this, when comes disturbance, we are always saying what is the disturbance contexted to. And if somebody has an agenda or a context, then the disturbance becomes either good or bad. So I think disturbance is life happening. The best is to use it to your context, because it's going to happen anyways. So how do we align ourselves and our restoration policies to accommodate maximum resilience and maximum diversity for the forthcoming future is how I would play or understand or observe disturbance. That's where I'll leave it at.
Great, thanks, Rohan. Mahesh?
Yeah, I'll just quickly maybe just add a couple of points. Yeah, it often tends to be the case that invasives tend to be associated with disturbance. Now we'll come to what the disturbance is in a bit. But yeah, disturbances open up space. It allows species to colonize. It increases nutrient levels, for example, or sometimes it increases light levels and so on. And because invasive tend to be typically fast-growing, these good colonizers, disturbances tend to favor them. But just taking up on a point that Rohan just made, that but disturbance is very context specific. So, for example, in a forest, like a linear path or a road or something that cuts and increases the light, actually can act as a disturbance and favor invasives. But for example, I was just thinking about this in the grassland patches. For example, I don't see that many invasives around the roads, right? If you're driving up in the Nilgiris, where all the forests are, right next to like Taishola or anywhere, the roadsides are full of exotics, invasives. But once you have the grassland patch, it's not that the roadsides are filled with invasive species at all. I mean, I think in this case, it's the disturbance is opening up light, which is what limits these invasives in the understory. They're not able to. They're light demanding species, so they can't grow in the understory of forests. Whereas in the grassland, there's enough light. So I don't think these things are favoring. So it must be some other kind of disturbance that's favoring the plants in the open grassland habitat. So it's important to keep that in mind, that disturbances are not the same across all kinds of biomes. Like, for example, grasslands where we work, fire is great. We love fires because it's inherent part of the system. But in a forest, it's not. It's a huge problem, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick response to that, Mahesh, would be that, up to Thai, Shola, Korakunda and all, we're still within tea estate country where they are using fertilizers of one kind or another, even if it's organic.
Yeah.
And there is a tar road and there is a movement of people and traffic and so on. So at a very simplistic level, there is that. And then once you get to the grasslands, that's highly limited. So you don't, for instance, have a tar road in the middle of Bangitapal and Shishpara and so on. Hopefully that's not going to come.
Yeah.
So there are multiple reasons. Mandeep, how do we want to do this? Do we want to open this up to the group, to the questions? We could just go on. Yeah.
I'll let you decide that. We do have a long lineup of questions.
Okay, do you want to take those then?
We can, unless there's something pressing that you'd like to discuss first. At one, we'll do a time check.
Nutrition and disturbance, the nature of the two were two, like overarching themes. Okay. And I think it's very important to bring in, some new questions maybe.
Mm-hmm. We'll go with the first question about nutrition, which is from Anonymous. And Anonymous asks, given the context of the discussion about how we need to control soil nutrients, I'd like to ask, how do we do that in natural forests which have been invaded? It's not
easy.
Directed to anybody.
Not easy, but I'll just share what we did. So here it was morely acidification. So liming was one of our techniques. It is just specific to our context, so don't take it as a thumb rule. Different soils have got different characteristics. Sometimes something like even grazing can help. Same grazing can be a disaster in some other context. So there are different contexts. So for your own specific soil context, look at what was the reason of soil nutrition or pollution in the first place, and then try to find your answer which is suitable to your context. So the answers are always context specific. Sometimes it is just a matter of removal of the topsoil, or just reinforcement of seed banks, or actually in some cases also it's not uncommon that you'll add dung or manure from local or domestic farms, and that also can work wonders. But again, the answer for soil treatment is always context and ecosystem specific. So in your own context, you'll have to figure out what is ecologically correct. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Rohan. Aliston, Dr. Mahesh, would you like to chip in?
Yeah, no, more of the same, I guess. So it's the context, right? So depends on so many things before you decide what to do.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Rohan, for that. Speaking of farms, we have a very interesting question from Aditya, who's asking this from a farming landscape perspective. The question is, how should we sustainably manage the nutrition in a farmland to also ensure the larger biodiversity services that a sustainable farm could potentially serve? Aliston, is that something that you would like to take on?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Basically, the question is, how do we sustainably manage the nutrition in a farmland such that the farmland also ensures place for biodiversity, since biodiversity seems to thrive in nutrition poor soils, and farmlands potentially receiving not tons but a lot of nutritious fertilizer. How can a sustainable farm balance both if the goal is also to increase biodiversity services?
Yeah, implied in that question is high yield, and maybe we need to let go of the yield a bit and give that space, right? We can't have both worlds, I guess. So we have to give that those niches for biodiversity and let go of a bit of that, trying to maximize the yield from a small piece of land.
Just a quick follow-up question. Wouldn't physical separation help in this case? The zone for biodiversity can be kept separate from where the fertilizer application is happening, and making sure that it's downslope, not upslope of.
Sure, that could also work. Yeah, but yeah, it's very difficult to say until I know the context and where exactly in the valley are you, what is the exact landscape, and the context is very critical here.
Something that I've done. Oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Dr. Sankaran.
No, please.
Just a very short point. Something that I've done on my own farm is actually so it's about 40 acres. So out of that, and it's in India. It's quite close to Hubli. I've actually made a forest patch on the farm, about 6 or 7 acres, and left it to be a forest. So if you can do your farming with something like agroforestry or with something like horticulture, then that is another way of bringing in more diversity to your farm, and not just be cereal or crop intensive. And that's another way of kind of addressing biodiversity at the farm. Yeah, that's all.
I was going to say
maybe.
one
Go ahead, Mahesh.
That people could do. I mean, I'm just talking about general farmers, is just the amount and the timing of the fertilizer application. And this is a global problem. I know people have done studies in Mexico, for example, where they're pumping in, like, say, 8 tons per square kilometer or something, and 7 tons of those are just going off because it's at the wrong time, right?
Yeah.
And I think here what we tend to do is all farmers tend to use, maybe I'm just whatever subsidies they have, they tend to use and deploy those, right? And maybe it needs a little more targeted thing that you can actually use less fertilizer, but if you use it at the right time, you'll reduce the loss, and that can contribute a lot to, a little bit more sustainability and not flowing out downstream and have biodiversity effects. Yeah, I think we need to be more circumspect about it.
Right. Just to add to this, as a response to this question, I actually started off a little bit in agroecology before I came to Wayanad. And one of the things, very, very broad things that are shifts that maybe the agricultural community can make is simply when you shift from a larger percentage of annuals to a greater percentage of perennials, for instance, that changes that changes the local ecology quite substantially. You're not plowing so much and all that. The plants are growing over several seasons, and then another very simple one is just when you go from, say, chemical to organic. So I've identified broadly 4 changes that you can make without doing the species selection thing that should be very specific to your local context, but something like annual to perennial, chemical to organic, and then say more native or local species and lesser exotic species. And the fundamental one would be going from monocultures to polycultures. So these are, any farm anywhere can sort of work within the broad framework of this. And then locally, what all our speakers are saying is that the context is so specific locally that you're going to have to work that out for yourself, yeah.
Thanks, Suprabha and Mahesh, for that. There's a very interesting question that's come in. Suprabha, you're gonna like this one, I think. From Anonymous. The question goes, all this begs the question, where should restoration efforts focus on? Should the restoration effort be focused on fighting to reduce the pollution sources, be it nitrogen, PFAS, all manner of excessive nutrients? But isn't that daunting, nigh impossible?
Who wants to take that?
Maybe I'll go first.
Yeah.
I'll keep it short. More than it's easier to be motivated if you know what you want, than to kind of focus on what we have to remove. See, one part of restoration is removal. The second part is to rejuvenate something which is a very resilient system. So I think that there's two parts to the entire theme of restoration. One is, what do you want to restore? Can you accommodate, or whatever your policy is, can it accommodate maximum diversity for a resilient future? I don't think that there is any restoration to the past, because there is, I mean, it just makes no sense. So whatever your system is, a rejuvenation to a maximum resilience future should be your sense of motivation. Yes, it's very daunting to remove many things, to correct many things, but I would focus on what needs to be achieved than what the removals are, you know. So the removals is, so let's just say that we have got a sick patient. He's not going to eat nice foods, he's not going to eat tasty foods. That's the daunting part. But we are going to rejuvenate his health is the motivating part for the doctor. I mean, just place yourself in the place of the doctor. So I think I would focus more on that to kind of capture your motivation, and still do what is necessary that needs to be done in the right ecological context. That's how I would motivate myself to do it. And yes, it is daunting, but we still got to do it. So
Mahesh, you want to take that?
Well, not much to add other than they're actually two different battles. Because if you're talking about nitrogen deposition, there's a huge problem with nitrogen deposition because the source is typically far away from where you are, right? Industrialization, it all goes up into the atmosphere and then gets transported and gets deposited downstream. But that's a whole different battle that one needs to fight differently to reduce N deposition or even phosphorus deposition. We know, countries like India are actually and China are on the rise. We are hotspots of nutrient deposition. Whereas your local restoration issue, well, you'll have to, fight that locally, like he was saying. So it's not an easy solution. Yeah.
Aliston?
Yeah, I mean, there are challenges, right? But I feel fundamentally, if we don't, like we're talking about root causes here, right? So if we fundamentally don't shift that from that level, I mean, just what Mahesh said, they put 10 times the amount of, because of the subsidies or the incentives, 10 times what the plant needs, and just because it's available. So if we don't stop that, yeah, we can go like that, but I feel whatever we can't predict the outcomes, then nature's going to just throw a curveball, and we have to be ready for that also. So I guess until we stop the tap, the industrial tap from, and it's not just the nutrients, but the toxification. I mean, this is becoming, for me, the more I research it, the most shocking kind of thing that, all these were allowed into the market when the incentive should have been from the start to be the precautionary principle, right? And yeah, I feel we have to stop this toxification majorly before we can, actually address some of the fundamental things about certain species being able to take over. One thing comes to mind is suppose I've been fascinated with this to see even in pristine landscapes, there will be this one-off example where an invasive has taken over. And before I couldn't understand how that happened, but I now am led to believe, again, this is very speculative, but there could be an airborne pollutant that is bought there. And that airborne pollutant, once it has reached there in a localized way, it's preventing the symbiotic microbes of a certain native species to bond, because the moment the seed germinates, the first thing it does is search for soil partners, right? And there may be something there where it's disrupting that, but the invasive seems to be able to tide that over and be able to, weather that and even thrive in that. So, so there's something about that we can't expect to predict the outcomes in this scenario until we stop the toxification, or especially things we don't understand, the unknown unknowns, the things that we don't even know that we know. We don't know, sorry.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Aliston. Maybe I can just add to that by saying that, this is a species which is split the atom and control fire and so on. And then is a member of the species is asking, well, what are the options? And so I feel like the human imagination is conceived of some pretty amazing or very destructive on the one hand, but also very deeply engaging, what indigenous peoples have done, or
Innovative.
permaculture, or say this restoration community, or alliances that are formed. So I would say, well, you have to become a member of the ERA. Like maybe whether this ERA or some other ERA, that alliances are essential, and that between us we have these amazing scientists and practitioners, for instance, just today, that we need to engage with full spectrum, I would say, what's happening. We need to ask the question, and it shouldn't be either or, because as you work with a particular place, you're going to be dealing with the questions of how do we stop this process, how do we block this, how do we do that, and then how do we plant. So actually the very nature of restoration ecology, which is sort of one of the most amazing things that humankind can be engaged with right now, is instead of bombing each other and so on, has to engage with this a spectrum of influences and impacts on a single body, on ourselves. Do we fight a cold, or do we go for a walk? So I would say that that's a complex question, and there's nothing better than being part of an alliance and engaging and getting people to fight certain things and getting others to grow and to educate and to work on policy. And one of the things I've been thinking about is ethical endurance, that between us, that this is sort of the pressing challenge of this time, of getting through this period with all the member beings of this planet. And how do we do that in a Hippocratic, what is the Hippocratic oath that restorationists can sign on to? The least damage with the greatest results. I think Rohan touched upon that. So maybe so we can take another question, Mandeep, or how do we want to go? It's 1 o'clock.
It was a brilliant point that you made. I was thinking that we could close it. It was perfect for that. But since you asked, I just wanted to do a quick time check. We are past 1 already. If the panel and those who can still stay willing, we can maybe take another question. We'll take one on roads, because that speaks of a different kind of disturbance. So Ruchika has asked, in case of ecotourism sites with dense forests, which are attempting restoration, roads may be required for functional reasons. Is there a preventive or post-construction methodology that one can apply to prevent the growth of invasives? What would the approach be? I also felt that this was interesting. It's like one of my own questions, because roads tie into habitat fragmentation as well. So what do you guys think of that?
I guess, again, slightly context specific, but so I used to work in the US at the Sandhill Crane Refuge, and we had this dilemma actually, that initially we really required a mud road to get all of the equipment inside, and it was quite a massive piece of restoration. But in the end, when we started kind of rolling back from the entire project, once a certain level of objectives of the seed banks and all of that were achieved, we actually closed some of the roads. And after a certain time, some core zones were not accessible to public. And second was, most of the roads which were made initially were also just mud roads. But again, that was our context specific. And then some massive chunks of roads we actually led to rewild. So if it is a tar road, it's really a bad idea, because you're making some permanent damages over there. So kind of carefully planning your zone and how you are approaching your restoration, and the extent basically of how big is your, I mean, I cannot do that in the Czech Republic because everything is already cement and tar, but that is something we could do in the US because it was a fairly core forest. So again, context specific answers, but if you can rewild your roads again and close down some of them completely, go ahead and do it. So because we don't need access all the time. The point of this ecotourism that everybody should be able to go to all the corners of your restoration. No, the ideal way is after some time, keep the people out. I mean, sorry for being blunt and blank, but that is how it is. So, yeah.
Mahesh?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a double-edged sword, right? Sometimes you need the road to get to where you need to go to be able to do the stuff that you need to do. But yeah, maybe there are options like what was suggested, that you don't make it a permanent road, you don't make it a tarred road, and if possible, just wind up operations as quickly as one can and keep traffic to a minimum. I'm sure there are other best practices, so to speak, that many other people may be aware of to minimize the impacts, particularly when it comes to invasives. But yeah.
Aliston?
Yeah, nothing much to add to Rohan and Mahesh. Just that, yeah, there's some of the same old things. Like the moment we even have footwear, there's something about what's used in the footwear that is bothering me. The chemicals they probably used in that, even if it's not a tar road, even if it's a foot road. But again, these are my preoccupations. I'm continuously worried about all these things.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we take for granted, like Rohan said, that people should have access at a time when, total collapse is sort of being also projected by so many people. And that, is there a question that we can educate people into asking, what are the needs of the natural world in that place, in that dense forest that you speak about? And how do we educate ourselves to enter these places in the best possible way? And I'm saying this when I know that tourism has hit Wayanad in such a big way. And then in terms of recovery, like invasives or these fast moving species are going to come with a road. Those are one of the pathways. Roads and 21 million kilometers of roads worldwide are pathways for these fast moving species. Do you want to work with them like Aliston? Do you want to take them out? Or do you have a excellent nursery like Divya and Sridhar of Nature Conservation Foundation have? They have an excellent nursery that is there that can actually do the repair work instantly. Or, so there are many, many questions to ask, but maybe not to take it for granted that entitled people that should have access to these very fragile places. Okay, Mandeep.
Any parting words, Suprabha, for anyone else?
Are we moving towards closure on this
I
session?
believe so. Yeah, we're way past time. So
okay. So I just wondered if we could just look at a few images. And Mandeep, if you would, first of all, thank you, the three of you, really for amazing input. It's been fun, and I'm hoping really that we can reconnect in one way or another. I'm going to tell Mandeep to put my email so that people can write to me. I don't know about how people can access you, but maybe we can make that possible, because I'm sure they have questions
Absolutely.
for all of you.
You can share emails, and we are absolutely happy to answer and on email anytime.
Yeah. So, I want to look at visually just look at other invasives. This is like a single moment air traffic. Where's Mandeep?
Yes, give me a second. It's giving me trouble.
Yeah.
It's not maximum.
So, we're without at all diminishing this desire to ally with the natural world. I think it's important to do some, reckoning with what's invading and the forms it's taking. And this is just, I think, air traffic on one particular day. I got it off some other website, which then sent me off to flight radar and so on. This is just a point in time. Can you just go on to the next one? So what that does to the atmosphere.
My system is just...
Is that going to be difficult?
Do you see it now?
No.
We still see the flight radar.
Flight radar.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, I see it.
Still seeing flight radar. Okay, so this is shipping. This is shipping again on some particular moment. This is shipping. So there's a few of these images that to me speak more than numbers. I sort of see it better, maybe, that what is actually spreading. And these are pathways for these so-called, look at this one, we've talked about roads. This is some highway in China, I think. Just the scale of the problem, and to be very, very clear in ourselves and not to be romantic this way or that way, and still somehow, love the land and love these places and these biomes. This is apparently roads, the density of roads across the world.
India is second to the US.
India is second to the US in terms of numbers of kilometers. And then I think there's one more image, Mandeep. Which is
this one.
Yeah, I think one more. Oh yeah, there are two more. So this is transmission lines in India, Central Electrical Authority or whatever. I mean, when you see this, it's like you might as well just give up and drink yourself silly to death or something. But for me, these are, I feel like hard science requires that we negotiate this, and realistic engagement empowers me personally to actually, to form my own networks, perhaps. I think there was one more on light pollution or the Earth by night. But,
I thought that had been put up.
Yeah, it's okay. So anyway, there was just one more thing. So I wanted to end with a few visuals. I think restoration ecology, or an allegiance with the natural world, is perhaps one of the most profound callings of this time. And I sincerely thank the scientific mind when it negotiates this reality and shows us facts, and also practitioners for taking on these very complex issues and daring to do something about it at whatever scale. And so there are, at least in the ERA, there is that breadth of effort, from the big fight to the nurturing and the care for each other and for landscapes and for plants. So on that note, I'm just going to thank you all for attending. Very nice session, and hand it over to Mandeep.
Thanks a lot, Suprabha. Suprabha once described herself as the breaking committee of ERA, not the steering committee, because she's constantly urging us to stop and slow down and think instead of steering it. But thanks. I hope you don't mind me sharing that with everybody. But thanks a lot for pushing us to do this, and thank you for putting this together. It was also great to have you guys, Aliston, Dr. Mahesh, and Dr. Rohan, and have you share your perspectives with us. It gives the mind quite a lot to think about. Very quickly, I'd remind everybody that if you're interested in removal, we will address it. Removal done in ecologically sensitive ways at a later point as part of this webinar. And thank you so much for coming here and sticking around. Time and attention are very important resources, and thank you for giving us 2 hours of it. So we hope to meet you again in a future panel discussion. So see you then.
Thank you, Mandeep.
Yes,
Rohan.
thank you so much.
Bye, Mahesh.
And you can share
Rohan.
the email address.
Yeah,
wherever-
please
wherever
share
it
mine
is.
also. And
Sure.
just a final note of thanks. There's a wonderful group of the ERA desks who handle a lot of people's questions and queries, and are really networking to create a vibrant community and breadth of efforts, which is other than the steering committee. I really would like to thank them, and please approach them for support. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.